Macedon was a part of Greece, but it was also somewhat distinct and different from the rest of Greece. The Greece of the classical world and of the south and central parts of the Greek peninsula was an area made up primarily of city-states, polis as the Greeks called them. Small areas centered around a particular city, each governed by either a democracy, where virtually all the citizen men were members of the ruling group of that society, or oligarchies, where the franchise was restricted to a narrower group, say the aristoi, the aristocrats, or the wealthy merchant class in Corinth, for example. Macedon was actually unlike either one of these models, because Macedon was a kingdom located in the northern part of the Greek peninsula, and it was a kingdom where power was not strongly centralized in the hands of the Agiad dynasty, the family that provided the rulers of Macedon. There were, in fact, inland areas, we can call them cantons or fiefdoms if you like, where local barons ruled sometimes almost independently. These were the barons, the ruling class, the aristocratic elite, if you like, of Macedonian society. Now, the Greeks themselves were interested in the question of what makes a Greek, and were the Macedonians Greek? Well, we fortunately have a guide to the way that the Greeks understood their own ethnicity. Herodotus tells us in a celebrated passage that there were 4 ways of determining who was a Greek. And in Herodotus's formulation, the elements that made up your ethnic identity were your blood, expressed in genealogy, who was your father and who was his father, the language that you spoke, the religion that you followed, and the customs that you used in your daily life. So let's use these Greek criteria to look at the Macedonians. Well, first of all, on the question of blood, the Greeks expressed their Greekness through a series of heroic genealogies, so that every Greek could claim descent from a heroic forefather. And eventually, above all of these, at the very beginning of all these genealogies, was Hellas, the man from whom the Hellenes, the Greeks, took their name. Now, the Macedonians were a part of the heroic genealogy of the Greeks, but they were out on the very edge of this genealogy, as if the Greeks of, say, Athens and Thebes and Argos and Sparta thought of the Macedonians as being distant cousins, Greek, but Greek with a question mark, perhaps. What about language? Well, our best evidence here is from the inscriptions and the many personal names that we know of individual Macedonians themselves. And here we can state fairly safely that the Macedonians appear to have spoken Greek. That's certainly the language they used for their inscriptions, and the names of the individual Macedonians are Greek names. So it looks as if, from the point of view of language, the Macedonians spoke a dialect of Greek. It may have sounded a little odd to people down in Athens, but it would have been intelligible and understood. What about from the point of view of religion? Well, once again, we find the same mixture of both Greekness and non-Greekness contributing to the Macedonian identity. For example, there's good evidence in Macedon that Zeus, the father of gods and men, as he's called by Hesiod, and Artemis, the virgin goddess, who was the hunter and the goddess associated with wild places, both of these gods were worshipped in Macedon. And these are clearly Greek gods. But on the other hand, there's also evidence for the popularity of a goddess called Bendis, who was a Thracian goddess. In other words, the Greeks would have thought of her as being vaguely foreign, not quite the same as the Olympian gods. And there's another goddess called Enodia, a goddess who's normally shown riding on a horse and carrying a torch, and she really has no close parallels in the southern Greek world. So the Macedonians betray their relationship to the Greeks of the south and also to the peoples further north of them, the Thracians, a so-called barbarian people in the eyes of the southern Greeks. And what about custom? The best way that you could show that you were Greek in the eyes of other Greeks was to participate in the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were one set of what are called the Pan-Hellenic Games, games that were held every 4 years, but were only open to Greeks for participation. So if you could participate there, it meant that the judges of the games, who were in fact known as the Greek judges, the Hellenodikai, it meant that in their eyes you were Greek. Now, a Macedonian king, Alexander I, wanted to participate in the Olympic Games, and when he went to Olympia, on his first try, he was rejected by the Hellenodikai, the judges of the Greeks. Why? Presumably because they didn't believe he was really Greek. And so what he had to produce was a family tree that showed that his family, the ruling family of Macedonia, was in fact related to the Argives. So it had a good Greek pedigree.